Welcome, everyone, to Wannabe Wisdom Live. I'm Ashley Evans, and if you're new here, this is a space where we explore writing, creativity, self-expression, and the excavation of the self. And today I'm joined by by someone whose work I deeply admire, Ulrich Schaffer. Schaffer, sorry, I keep getting Schaffer and Schaefer, but Zilia told me there's actually like a definition difference between the two words, isn't there?
Yes, there
Doer.
is. There is a Schaefer, like the Schaefer pen has an AE, and our name is just A, and so we distinguish it by saying Schaffer. But
Schaffer.
it's not a big deal. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, I met you briefly 12 years ago at Zilia's birthday party, and I had actually just really met Zilia. And I remember being so taken back by you. We had a lovely conversation, and I was a writer at the time. I mean, amateur writer, but I met you and I was like, who is this person? He's a poet and he's made a living off of poetry. Like, how is that possible? So yeah, I always remembered that conversation and hoped I'd be able to have another one with you one day. And here we are. So
Yeah.
yeah, um, I will give a little introduction, a little bit of your background for our audience. Ulrich is German-born, Canadian-raised poet, author, and photographer. He's published over 200 works of poetry, prose, fiction, and nonfiction with over 5 million copies in print. He began writing at 15 years old and published his first book at 21. His work explores conscious living, love, aging, grief, and spiritual presence. His life has been shaped by migration, marriage, teaching, caregiving, and quiet reflection. He now lives in Gibsons, BC, where he cared for his wife, Trotty, through her final years with dementia, an experience he wrote about in his book, With You, Without You, which I really want to read. He now lives there alone and is re-releasing many of his most beloved works in English to a North American audience in collaboration with his daughter and my friend Zilia. And today we are talking about writing, love, and conscious living. And I'll let Ulrich chime in with anything I might have missed, but we will start in right away with something simple and essential. Why do you write? What pulls you back to the page time and time again?
I think I write mostly to orient myself in the world. The world is so crazy, and you all know what's happening around us, which is sometimes hard to understand. And I try to find my way through that by writing. And I noticed that in writing, which is more than just thinking, I'll do it the other way around. In thinking, we have thoughts that go through our mind. Apparently, we have something like 40,000 thoughts a day, and they go through in a few seconds and they're gone. As soon as I have a pen or something in my hand to write with, I have to be more consequential. I have to be more determined to get to the end of a thought. And so my way of writing is to sort out what I experience, and not on an external level so much, not the politics of the world, but the psychology of the. I'm very interested in what is happening in the United States, for example, but the psychology behind it, what makes people do what they do, and then I take a step back and write about it in a more general sense. So it's not specific to anything, but it's more general.
Thank you. I appreciate hearing that. As you were talking about that, you need a pen in your hand to think
And
and to write. I literally found myself grabbing my pen, like, okay, we're doing this conversation. It's my little key.
yeah,
But
yeah.
do you have like a daily journal practice that you have? Like, what's your process like?
I did have a journal. I did do a journal, published, I think, 4 or so journals, daily journals, very short, clipped kind of statements. And then I left it because I often write poetry. I sometimes write 3, 4, 5 poems a day, and it's almost like a journal then. I had the really good fortune of meeting William Stafford, an American poet, just before he died.
Mm.
He was he was a major poet in the States, and he would get up at 4 in the morning and wrote every day. He wrote 22,000 poems in his life.
Wow.
Of which only 3,000 were published. It's an amazing output, and I thought I think that was 30 years ago we met, and I had the feeling I could do that, or that makes sense to me, so that I don't do journaling. I have a feeling I want to start again though, but a lot of times I write poems, so
Oh,
and they are like journals.
oh, that's lovely. I um It's interesting. Just recently, I came back into poetry, first through David Whyte's poetry, and now I'm finding my way into your poetry. And I have a daily journal process in the mornings when I wake up, similar to Stratford. The brain I find is the freshest in the morning. The brain
Hmm.
waves are slow, and I have more clarity. Um, but yeah, the idea of poetry hasn't really resonated with me until really recently, and I feel kind of an inspiration to write poetry. I mean, I don't really know where to begin, but just
You know, let me jump in there for a second. I I have a feeling it's very important how you see poetry. Uh, And I have changed my view over time that poetry does not have to be that special. It could be like journaling. And give one example. When I met Stafford 30 years ago, we had a really lovely talk, and then he did a reading in the afternoon in Salem, Oregon. I went to it, and what intrigued me was he was on stage. There were a couple of hundred people there, and he was speaking, and then suddenly you realized he was already reading a poem. The entry into the poem was so easy and so flowing, and I thought, yeah, why that is so good that it poetry does not have to be a very special thing, but I'm talking and I'm looking out. I live right by the ocean here. I'm looking out, and the waves are coming in, and that's already the first line of a poem. The waves are coming in. And then I take it further and I go back and forth. And before I know it, I have a poem. And it's not a poem, like a sonnet by Shakespeare or even by Yeats or somebody like that. But it is a very daily kind of thing. And I love that. If literature could be a more um, start more where we really are. We'll have to talk about being present in a minute as well, but to be
mhm.
really where we are, because that's where people can pick us up. I think many people are damaged by having studied poetry in school, where the teacher says, what did the poet mean by this? And then you have to figure it out. And, that the poet meant something else, and he was writing that he wrote the poem because that's what he wanted to write, right? You don't have to necessarily figure it out. And to make it really close to life, basically, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So
Uh,
I wish you that when you write poetry, that you let it come right out of life onto the page.
Wow, I'm taking that advice. Thank you. You just made me remember. I think I have trauma with poetry because I went to university like back in the early 2000s, and I took a creative writing class where we had to write poetry, and I was excited about it. But I remember the teacher kind of picked a favorite. There was a woman who was quite talented in writing poetry, and we read her poetry, and it felt inaccessible to me, and the way that you just described it is just starting from wherever you are, and the waves are rolling in, we're sitting in a room on Zoom or
Yeah,
on Substack, like,
exactly. Exactly.
and just starting there, and yeah, that's accessible, and that's the beginning of presence, what you what you started talking about. Um, we could talk about presence. Yeah, we could actually talk about presence. We'll get to presence in a moment.
Yeah,
Um,
you can go by what you had in mind.
okay.
By the way, in journaling too, let me just quickly throw that in. I discovered something in journaling. I think it was 40 years ago. I published my first journal. It was 300 pages. And what I really learned, and I learned it from Peter Handke, the Nobel Prize winner 4 years ago, an Austrian writer. He had the guts, I will say, to write in his journal. He wrote sometimes 2 or 3 words, and then a new entry, again 3 or 4 words. He would be sitting in a theater, and he said, "I just saw this," or "Beside me is a man who coughs," or whatever it is, and it makes it. We are so uh, determined and told to think in full sentences and to round things off and have it make sense. And so we write things that we cannot really back up with ourselves. But if we are allowed to write fragments, small bits, things would just flow onto the page, right? And I
Yeah.
think that the answer, right? That is fabulous. And I did that in those journals, and I found it really good, very releasing for me that I didn't have to think in these complete things.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Poetry is now striking me as like the rebel of all of the forms of writing. It's like it can come out in
Hmm.
any shape or
Yeah. Yeah.
unfragmented sentence. It's
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Um, so one of your works, Heart Work, which I had the privilege to read, you in the preference
I
or the
actually have.
preface, and you design all of your own covers as well, don't
Yes,
you?
I do. And this was the first book I did when I moved to the Sunshine Coast, and has an arbutus on it, an arbutus tree, right?
Oh, beautiful. It
Yeah,
almost looks like strips of paint.
yeah. It's the bark of an arbutus that has that red, and yeah.
Wow. I'll quote you here. You say, "To live a fulfilled life, we have to do heart work. It is not enough to work only from one's body or only from one's head. Without the work of the heart, something important will not get done." What is the work of the heart for you?
That is a very simple and a very complex question. Um, I feel that we have even given too much credence to our intellect. We live very headily. We live from our heads, and we think literature is a heady thing. It's figuring out ways of writing, doing things, and we forget the heart. And the heart is, to me, uh, my totality, my whole being, and particularly in poetry, my vulnerability.
Mm,
The vulnerability. And if one is an intellectual, you don't become vulnerable. It's a bunch of thoughts, and I'm not against intellectualism at all. I find it fascinating, but in poetry, I think it's very important, and in writing general, to do hard work. That is to let your whole being be seen in the work. That it's not just an interesting thought, but that you appear in it, you become present. And that is what um, triggers the presence of the reader when reading, especially in poetry.
mm,
And and a lot of poetry is so heady and so full of connections that you can't follow because they are private or they're intellectual. There's mention of a writer or of a legend or a mythology, and you have to look it up first before you can enjoy the poem. And maybe there's a place for that every now and then. But beyond that, I think if we become vulnerable and show our heart, show our inner being, poetry becomes very moving.
Yes. I think that's what I struggled with when I first came into poetry, the intellectualism of it.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, but what you're talking about is your heart, putting your heart on the page through the writing. And it's interesting. I was just looking up some science around the heart and heart coherence. And there's actually an institute that has done a lot of studies around the heart. And they say that the heart has its own neural network that
Mhm.
operates independently of the brain. And the heart has an electromagnetic field that radiates 60 times greater than the brain is able to. And they can actually
Mhm.
measure it a few feet outside of the body. And I was just thinking about that. Oh, it's so interesting. If a writer becomes well, you're writing, you put your heart into it. It's almost like you can radiate that from the page to the reader.
That is always my hope. I um I always hope that somebody is moved by a line or a poem or a verse in a poem. Uh, that is my primary criterion. You have to that a person is moved in their soul, in their being, in their inner being by a line that something uh, is triggered. Yeah.
Yeah, your poetry is very moving and triggering. I was reading one last night called Wild and Gentle. And I was just repeating it. I actually did a little reading of it on Instagram, and I
Hmm.
repeated the line over and over. And maybe I'll ask you about it later, but wild and gentle, gentle on the outside, wild in the inside.
Hmm.
It was such an interesting feeling that was coming to me because it was, and I don't know if I interpreted it correctly, but it almost felt like the wild on the inside was kind of a volatility, and the gentle on the outside was a face that
Yes.
people put
Hmm.
on to.
Hmm.
It's almost like a superficial face,
Yes.
but they're getting more. Okay, I did interpret that because it was
Yeah. Yeah.
landing on me like that. But the language was really interesting that you used gentle because often we interpret exterior, like gentleness, as positive, but it was more of a
Hmm. Yeah.
falseness.
Yes. I
Yeah.
wanted I wanted that because um, if I'd used the word superficial or something like that, people would say, yeah, yeah, we understand that's a fake face. But even our gentleness is often at the expense of our wildness, and the wildness wants to be expressed, wants to have a place in our life. It needs to have a place opposite the gentleness. Otherwise, the gentleness becomes very maudlin. It becomes kind of cheap, and they both need each other. I am very convinced of opposites really needing each other to remain healthy. If the gentleness does not have the wildness, it becomes maudlin. It becomes yeah, and if the um, wildness does not have the gentleness, it can become a kind of craziness, right? And licentiousness and with no borders. And I think, it has to happen within a reasonable, at least a reasonable frame. Otherwise, it's destructive. Both sides can be destructive without the other.
Yes, they calibrate each other.
Yes.
I want to be more wild on the outside and gentle on the inside.
Yeah.
um, Going back to what we were talking about, you were saying you'd like your writing to move people. This leads me to my next question. Do you think that writing can change the world? Do you s
I have thought about that all of my life because sometimes I sit down after having done so many books and so many texts, thousands of poems too in my life. I wonder, I sit down and I write another poem and say, what is the point? What does it really make any difference? And I am convinced that every piece of writing, especially if it's published, but even as it's being written, it enters a certain energy into the large field of energy that we all live in the world. There's an energy in the world, and every time I do something like that, every time I share an insight or discover it in me and write it down, I add to a kind of positive energy in the world. And I feel that that is my contribution. It's not very big. I don't have that much of a reach, right? I don't have the reach of some politicians, but I do believe that it enters another kind of energy into the world. And I think that's important. And we don't know if we really don't know what will change through that. I I am kind of convinced, and it's a very mystical concept, but I'm sort of convinced that we are all connected and all one. And what somebody else in Australia or New Zealand or China cannot realize or cannot bear, cannot carry, I might bear, and I might have the insight for. And so it's a big sharing, but that's very hard to prove, of course. And I don't need to prove it. I just believe it.
Yeah, I feel very similar actually, and I love mystical things. Like I have loved Liz Gilbert's. She writes a book called Big Magic about creativity
Mhm.
and the muse, and you hear of artists. Like I remember hearing Tom Waits. Apparently, when he has lyrics come to him, he needs to pull the car over, and it's like something is passing through him, and he has to get it
Mhm.
down.
Yeah.
And I think as a young writer and someone who's like trying to learn to listen to their intuition, I have ignored little intuitions when words come to me. Oh, that's nothing. Oh, that no one will care about that. Like I've spent years ignoring them, but just in the last couple years, I realized they're breadcrumbs. If you have something come to you, write it down. And I don't
Mhm.
can't explain it either, but there is a feeling, there's a energy, it feels important now, and now I don't question it, I just write it
Yeah.
down even if I'm scared to share certain things or yeah,
I
um,
I have I've taken another step in that I don't even want to think about whether it is effective or whether it does anything. It is my it is my job to do it. And what becomes of it and what people do with it, and if it changes the world, is none of my business in that sense. I am not out to change the world. I am out to be truly, truly me and to contribute who I am through my writing. And what becomes of that is out of my hands, and it's okay.
yeah, yeah. You're answering a call that's within
Mm.
you, but
Yeah.
you're just answering it.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, Going into a little bit of your writing history, tell us a little bit about your writing journey. When did it begin? I know that you started writing at 15, and you published your first book at 21. But yeah, tell us a little bit about your history, your journey.
Um, I find it interesting in that how I changed and how I combined things. I'll try to make it short. But at first, I had studied literature. I went as far as a PhD in literature. And so I knew what literature was and the literateness and the literacy of literature. And so I wrote when I was young, 19, 18, 19, 20. I wrote a lot of serious poetry, which was hard to understand. It was meant to be that way. Um, and then I met my wife, and she said, if you continue to write so that people will understand you, right? And I took that seriously. She had lots of good insights into life, and she was 6 years older. And so I took that seriously. And then I wrote in two directions. I wrote the more literary poetry, the more difficult, and I wrote what I called meditations, which were more easily understood poems. And then I tried for years and years to bring the two together. The literary ones were more metaphorical. They were more, yeah, more literate. There were more images in it. The others were very understandable and people could relate to them. And then I tried to bring it together. And then when I was 40, in my early 40s, I wrote a, I wrote a photo book called Growing into the Blue, which came out in English as well. And I finally managed to bring those two together to be understandable, but still maintain the literacy, the imagery, the imagery, and the metaphor that would carry a whole text through. And so since then, I've always tried to bring those two together. And I know that in German writing, I have a feeling I'm the only one that really tries to do that. You know, my poetry is understandable pretty well all the time, but it's very imagistic, has lots of images, lot of metaphors in it. So that is my has been my whole development, and I feel good about it that I managed to not give up one for the other. Right?
Yeah, that comes across really clearly in the various types of your writing. Because on one hand, I'm reading the Book of Rights, and it feels like something you might read from Eckhart Tolle, like The Power of
Hmm.
Now. It feels
Yeah.
very clear and inspirational. And then you read Heartwork, and it feels like Walt Whitman, you know? The And,
Yeah.
literary
Mhm.
snobs might, have trouble with those 2 authors in the same sentence, but
Yeah.
yours really crosses that chasm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Um, do people still read poetry, do you believe? I mean, I read
You know,
poetry.
the challenge I find is to say to people, poetry starts where your life is. It really start good poetry in quotation marks starts where your life is, and give it a chance. And so people do, but you have to encourage them because they almost disqualify themselves automatically because they did not do well in school in poetry, right? Because it's too difficult. They were reading Yeats and T.S. Eliot and people like that, which are difficult to understand, and so they think it's not about their life. But I think some modern poetry like Mary Oliver in English and William Stafford and Billy Collins. Billy Collins is a riot to read because he's so funny, but he was for years the poet laureate of the United States. So he was taken seriously, and uh, and there are others where you can get into it, and it doesn't have to be so hermetically sealed as people think poetry is. But it's an uphill battle. I mean, if you want to make money with literature, it's probably better not to write poetry unless I did in I think I mentioned this to you when we talked privately. I did a booklet one which was poetic. It was that combination. And the publisher had asked me to do this. And I wrote it in one afternoon, 15 texts and 15 photos. It was, a very simple thing. And it sold 1.5 million copies.
Oh.
It used to sell 500 copies a day. And I would be sitting in my place in Burnaby and I would say, 500 people are reading this tonight. And tomorrow, 500 new people. and the day after, 500 more people are reading this. And so it gave me it gave me a sense maybe one can win over people to more poetic writing, to have them give poetry a chance again.
I think so. I definitely, and I mean, people might knock this idea, but TikTok and Instagram allow you to have short form content, and there's a lot of criticism of that because it's, it's for the short attention span. But I could see like little vignettes, little pieces of poetry with, and I've actually done this in my own videos, put the handwriting text over top of the video, and it looks quite lovely, and a person can um yeah feel the poem, like they can experience
Mhm.
it visually.
Yeah.
And you're given your photography background, and you're already doing that in that booklet. It sounds like you paired the images with the words.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think there is there's an audience for it in today's age. I personally do. um who do you Oh, go for it.
When I was 18, 19, I wrote a lot of haiku and tanka, the Japanese form, the 3 line and the 5 line poems. And that was a good practice at the immediacy of that, which a haiku is just a description, very simple things, that that everybody can understand and that just adds something to your life. And I think maybe have come full circle, and the short content stuff that can be done on TikTok might be much like the Japanese haiku of the classical ages, done for hundreds
Yeah,
of years, right?
I'm just seeing a comment from Zelia. She says, "Dad, you should start a TikTok for daily poetry readings. I will help you. I will support you in any way you want to do that."
Okay, we'll figure that out. Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, I had a writing teacher, David Geary, who he had 3 boys, so he was busy. He was teaching here in Vancouver. He could only fit in writing haikus at the kitchen table before breakfast, and that was, like, all he could manage, and he's a
Mhm.
writer, but the haiku gave him
Yeah.
that access, short form. Um, the next question I have is, you're fluent and published in both German and English. Is it really possible for both languages to carry your voice equally? Yeah, and I'm just thinking, like, what does writing bilingually, um, how is it how is it different? How Yeah.
It is lovely. It is just lovely because each language has certain strengths and certain weaknesses. Maybe they're not weaknesses, but um, and they work differently. And um, I notice that when I translate things in English into English, it becomes much shorter. It literally is like 20% shorter than German. And so if I want to write very specific and make it just just so, the German works better. If I want it to be kind of more airy and light, not light in a superficial way, but airy, uh, English works better. Often there are words in English that just one word will carry the whole thing. And what I do, which is the real fun part, I translate from one language into the other. And of course, the metaphors don't work in the other language, but I translate them anyway. And so I suddenly have a very interesting line, which in the other language is a metaphor, but in the new language is is just an interesting form, but it's not a metaphor. And you don't read over it like you read over a metaphor easily, but then suddenly you stop because the line is unusual because it's a translated metaphor. And then I sometimes put it back into the other language and goes back and forth, and
Oh, wow.
it really works and is it is delightful to work with both languages. I feel too that I am at home in each one, Maybe a tad more in German right now because I've been writing so much in German. But when I sit down and start writing in English, it just it just comes out of me, and I'm surprised. It's sort of almost it comes out in spite of me, and which is a great feeling, right?
Wow, that's so interesting. It's almost like it sound are you saying it almost is like a third form? Like you have the
Yeah,
German
it is.
original and then you translate it and it's like it's not quite what you meant in
No,
the German form, so you have to try to make it mean what you meant, but at the same time there's this new thing that you're like, "Well, that's kind of
yeah,
cool too."
yeah. And then I take that new thing and put it back into the German original.
Oh, that's
And then
interesting.
it really it adds a touch to the original then too, you know?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
your previous works will be evolving as well as you change the
And,
put it back into the German.
yeah, it's not a major thing, but it's often details and lines and images that might take on a different shade. And
Yeah.
but it's fun, because I, I'm a very conscious writer in the lines, in the individual lines, the metaphors. So it gains by that. It's I sometimes wonder how long I can do this because, of course, I live in here on the Sunshine Coast. I live in a totally Anglophone world, and I was only 10 when I came to Canada, so my German was not that developed. But I read a lot of German, and I went to Europe and I did, as you I think mentioned, 1,600 readings, which are very interactive. They were a lot of readings were 3, 4 hours. I did one in Berlin that was 8 hours once. The people
Wow.
we started at 8 in the evening, and at midnight I said, it's time to go home, and they said, no, we're not going home. We want to get to the bottom of these things. So at 4 o'clock
Wow.
at 4 in the morning, somebody said, I have to go home. I have to change. I'm the going to church and the early mass. But why did I mention that? Where was I going with that? Forgotten now. But that these things matter and are important, right? Oh,
Yeah.
it was to do with the language um, that I don't know really of any writer. And this sounds a little presumptuous, but I don't know of any real writer that writes in two languages totally. Rilke wrote in French, but
Mm.
the French poems are not nearly as good as the German poems, and so it is somewhat unusual, but it has to do with the fact that I came to Canada at such a young age. But I
Yeah,
always
yeah.
talk. My wife is German, and so we talk German all the time. So I that is why I still have an accent after all these years. I never had an accent as a teenager, and then as I met my wife when we talked German, my accent came back, and so it's still there now. And and I have friends living here, and so we talk a lot of German, so it's still there.
Oh,
Yeah.
I saw a comment from Zilia about chatting about some examples offline about, with the German to English translation, just it would be interesting to look at that, but we can, chat about that offline. I have 2 questions here, and we can choose which direction we wanna go. One was talking about values or inner attitudes that guide you while you're writing, and, like, what grounds you when you sit down to write?
Um, the stillness, the quiet.
Mm,
I sometimes get up in the morning and I cannot wait to get to my desk. And so I'm in pajamas, I'm down there already because I am so I don't know if there's another writer like that. I sometimes feel I must be the only one that is so into formulating things and into giving what is inside of me shape. And it's not like it's already all done, but I sit down in this stillness, and I have the good fortune that it's very quiet, except the ocean waves, which I can hear almost from every room. And I sit down and I wait in that stillness, and maybe a word or a short a line, half a line comes to me. And I know there's more behind that, and it's happening inside of me. It's somewhere. And it has to do a lot with the heart, even though, the heart is a pump, but the heart, the totality of me, there's something that wants to be articulated. And so I just wait. And then another line comes, and then, a third line. And I realize the third line is not connected to the first two, so I leave a space. I write almost everything by hand, and there's a space there. And so I know these lines go together, but I have to fill that space. Something is missing. So I wait for that to appear. And so slowly this whole process happens. And it is just a very delightful process because it is a it is a journey of self discovery. What is happening inside of me? What wants to be articulated, and which is important. And out of it often comes stuff that I don't know about myself or about the world. It is the surprise. And so it is like it's almost like Christmas every morning, right? You don't know what the gift will be, what will happen. And
Mm.
I just I just love that.
Well, it sounds like you've learned how to play your instrument. Like your mind, your heart, your body is this instrument. You've learned how to play it. Like I think I'm like you. I wake up really excited with my cup of coffee and my pajamas to write, but I'm often not necessarily anything will come to me. So I have prompts. Like one will be, what don't I want to write about? And then I'll start
Hmm.
there.
Hmm.
But it's interesting listening to you talk. It sounds meditative, like, I'm curious, do you have a physical sensation? Like, is it? Because, like, I don't know if you feel this, but I can feel when I'm in my head versus my heart, like, physically. I can be like, I'm in my head, oh, I'm in my heart. Like, I could touch heart, head.
Okay.
But
Uh,
that's just
yeah, that sounds very interesting. I don't know. I will have to think about that, or have to watch myself when I write. Um, it seems like uh, all of that is one in me, and so I do think it's the head and the heart they're all they are identical. They overlap, or they are the same in that sense. Um, Yeah, and I sometimes have to wait too, so I don't, it doesn't always happen. What one thing I do is I read, and I might read another poet, and I think I counted once. I have 1,000 books of poetry just in my library. It's just a lot of different writers from different times and different language, so on. And so I might read a line of, say, of Mary Oliver, and one word, I will notice one word, and I close the book, Mary Oliver book, close it, and that is enough to launch me
mm,
into what I want to write. Just that one word is is a word that opens up a whole world then. So that helps me a lot. And
wow.
it has nothing to do with the poem of hers that I was just reading. It is just the word that has this special, it's like
Mm.
a kind of magic to open the world in me.
Wow, I'm gonna try that. Thank you.
Mhm.
And I'm sure there'll be others who will try that.
I know
And maybe
there are some writers that are better at doing that in you. There's one that I've discovered lately, not lately, but a few years ago already, is Philippe Jacotet, a Swiss writer who writes in French and who was voted into the the, the pantheon of 12, the greatest writers in the world, 12 of them. He just died, I think, 4 years ago, but I find him amazing, just for what he, what he elicits in me, what he touches off in me. But there are others. Real,
Maybe
yeah.
well, maybe we could, or I could put together a list, a reading list, and when we send out this recording, I could put that reading list together for people
At
who are
least,
interested.
yeah, at least a few people.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. What truths can you write about now that you couldn't or wouldn't earlier in life?
Um, I think I love, capital
Love.
LOVE, yes, love. I always wrote about it. I I wrote for my wedding. I did a book of poetry for my wife as a wedding present. So it was it was already there, that about what I was writing about, but it changed over the years. It became more and more mature, I believe. And so I'm doing one book now called Share the Moon. And then I will do a second book, which will be more mature a form of love. And then the last one I will do will be a more mystical book about love. And so I could not have written that 10, 20, say 20 years ago. Um, I, I needed to develop that side of me. And so I'm pleased that I have a feeling I'm getting that. Maybe to add to that, some of my best poems are 30 years old. And so I'm surprised when I look at them, and what they share often is something that I wrote, which I did not fully understand as I wrote it. The
Interesting.
yes, it was it kind of flowed through me onto the page, and I realized it's a good poem. I will put it in the book. And then as I kept and I used it because it was good, I used it in public readings. So I would be reading it over and over again at different years. I went for 40 years, I went to Europe without missing a year. Often I went twice. I went 60 times in those 40 years. So I got many chances to read some of these poems. And I realized that I was growing into them as, even though they were my poems, I needed to grow into them, into their full wealth and the full latitude of them. That was important. So was, I wrote a kind of ahead of myself. And I have a feeling that I would encourage people to try that, to do that, to write things down that you don't fully understand and to respect them as they are on the paper, and that you respect what you've written without fully understanding it, maybe trying it on somebody else. I remember writing a short story once, and I read it in a group uh, of reformed alcoholics, and they understood the story much better than I ever did, who had written it. They just,
Oh.
that's us. That's us. And I said, oh, okay. Okay. That kind of thing. So that's, I think, I think the writer is so much more than what he knows to be. And his texts, his works are more than he is aware of at times, not always. And
Mhm.
I just to sort of complete the circle, I think if we write from the heart, those things occur more. If we write from the head only, then we understand what we've written and it doesn't change. We always see, yeah, that's what I thought 10 years, 20 years ago. But if we write from the heart, it has a way of growing on us as it grows on other people as well.
Mhm. I'm almost visualizing, like, you as a young person naming, like, finding language to describe your feelings and what you're seeing, but not necessarily coming from a very intellectual, wordy, like synthesizing your experience place, more of a descriptive place. And now those descriptions, you can look back, you can look on them and pull meaning from those images and symbols that you weren't aware of that you were putting on
Mhm.
paper.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow, thank you for sharing that. That is really wonderful to think about. I want to switch gears and talk about your photographs. You've published over 3,000 photographs in your books, and you've talked a little bit about it, but maybe we could go into it more. What is the relationship between your writing and your photography? And do they express different parts of you or the same?
And it's both are creations, and so in that sense they are the same, but it uses a different part of me. And, I sit a lot at my desk and write and put together books and design the books. So it's all stuff at the computer for the last 30 years or so. And then sometimes I get tired of that and I would just jump into my camper and go into the desert, the American desert. I loved Utah, Colorado, Arizona, and so on. And and it would all be about visual things. It was all seeing, getting up in the dark in the morning before first light, hiking into where you would be alone and remote, and that had places that had not been photographed because they had not been discovered by people or only by a few people. And so it was all about visualizing and visual. And the I could not write. I would take lots of paper with me and pen, and I could not write because everything was geared to the eye, to seeing. But I felt that it still came from the same source in me. The creativity came from the same source. It was just a different aspect, a different way of expressing. And what I liked about it, because I was a landscape photographer mostly, and you can see it on my web page now, ulrichschaffer.net. We published a few photos. We'll put in more as we have time to do
They're
it.
beautiful. I
Yeah.
looked at them. They're really beautiful. I encourage people to go check out your website. It's in the last post, and I'll put it in the next
Yeah.
one too. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
the photography is really
Or
beautiful.
or the German website has more in it. It has
Okay.
a photo gallery, so there's probably 100 photos by categories. And yeah, the photography was or still is a way of responding to the world around me. And I would go into the desert, into sandstone formations, beautiful sandstone formations, for example, and they would work on me. They would they would work through my eyes, but they would be deeper in me, and I would respond so that it would be a dialogue between me and the landscape, between the items and the landscape, or river, and so on. And then, of course, I developed the the techniques to best capture that. Uh, and that's more for photographers, but uh,
Mm,
and so it was in many ways similar to a poem, which is a response to the world around me and in me. And the photographs were also a response to the world around me. I did a large format, quite a big, large format calendar for 40 years, an art calendar, which
mm.
which was always a lot of fun. I would come home from a trip and I would say to my wife, I got 4 calendar photos, on the trip, and that would be the pinnacle.
Yeah.
And the calendar used to sell 11,000 copies a year, so that was that was a really good income too to do that.
Wow.
I had to be aware of that too. That I would make enough money to feed my family still, right? As I because I had quit my job as a lecturer at a college, and it's always, uh, but it worked. It worked.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, you give hope to artists who are trying to figure out how to create, things that they can offer and
yeah.
sell, and because it is
Hmm.
possible to make a living. It's not conventional in the way that we're raised to believe, but you give us hope, Ulrich. You give us hope.
That,
Um,
that,
I
I'm glad. Can I add one more thing?
Yes,
Uh,
yes.
because you've leafed through the Book of Rights, you can see that I do a lot of graphics too now. I paint with a brush still in black and white because it doesn't cost anything to print black and white pages. Uh, and so I sometimes think that poetry books should be much more interesting to hold and feel and flip through. I have so many poetry books really done by excellent presses like the Copper Canyon Press in Port Townsend, which is sort of the poetry press in the United States. And you have the cover page, the introduction, and then the poems start, and then the end. There's maybe a tiny picture of the author, maybe not even that, and there's no afterward. There's nothing, and it's just you know how do you expect to draw people in? You have
Mm,
to do that something more, and so
mhm.
a lot of my poetry books are illustrated with black and white photography or with graphics, or even a line is printed on a page, one line in large font, that captures you. And I notice when at the book table, when I do readings, people are flipping through and they're stopping at the big text, at the graphic pages, because they're interested and you can read them in 2 seconds, right? Two
Yeah.
lines. And it's just, make your product more interesting, and that is
Mhm.
not so boring, and just a lot of what the Germans call a book that is just full of text. They call it a lead grave, lead as the metal, because they used to be typesetting used to be in lead, right?
Yeah,
And so it was a lead grave because it would just kill you as a reader because it
yeah.
was just text, right?
That's a good advice, and I mean, today with all the tools we have, Canva, Photoshop, we can do
Oh,
interesting things.
oh yeah, for sure.
I'm just aware we are at time right now, and, I know if
Okay.
people need to leave, you can, but maybe we'll wrap up with, what's next for you? And, by the way, we could talk for hours. I have so many more questions, and we didn't get to all of them, but we got to a lot. But yeah, what is next for you? Are there new projects or themes you're exploring? I do know you and Zilia are re-releasing your books through Life Giving Books, and that website will be up soon, and people will be able to purchase your books. And I'll make sure all that information is available. But yeah, what
Mhm.
is next for you? Are there other projects you're working on or themes, or are you
There
just oh
there is a movie director in my head that has been waiting for at least 5 years. It would be a novel about a movie director who is totally successful. It's one of the big movie directors in Hollywood, and he gets the diagnosis of terminal cancer, and he realizes all I have to do now, I have to learn to die. And he moves onto an island, which is off Nanaimo. I will imagine a new island there. I will stick a new island into the Gulf Islands, a small island where he moves, and he discovers all kinds of things. It's a very light-hearted book, actually, even though it's about
mm, mhm,
and yeah, and I he wants to be he wants to be described. I'm a little afraid of writing him because it's almost like I'm writing my own epitaph, and so I'm reluctant to do it. But a good part of it is written already, and it is. I will enjoy it. And I was thinking of making it into a graphic novel, even.
mm.
I'm not sure. I have a friend who's a really, really good graphic artist and designer of type fonts and a watercolorist. And I'm thinking maybe we will work together, or it will just be a book, a novel about his experience of that last chapter in his life,
I
because
yeah.
that's where I am more or less. I don't have terminal cancer, but my life is I've exceeded my life expectation already, so I'm living on borrowed time, right?
Well, if there's any producers in the Zoom chat, there's a really brilliant idea here. I think that it sounds like an incredible movie idea, and some of my favorite films explore these big questions. I mean, this
Yeah.
is this is what artists do. You explore the big questions, of life and death
Yeah.
and grief and loss. And
I've noticed, by the way, the novels I've written, they were all written. Noticed that in retrospect, they were all written as movies.
Mm.
Because if I come back to this life, I will come back as a movie director because I want to bring all the different things, my interest in music, my designing, my photography, my interest in text. I would like to bring all of that together into a total work of art. And so even the older novels, they're all the Sacrifice, the one about the Pope, would be a fabulous movie. I think it would outdo Conclave by 10 to 1. Yeah.
Those are some fighting words. I
Yeah.
I I think there's movies in your future for sure. Yeah, just the concepts of get those ideas out there. We're gonna have to pitch producers,
We'll see.
yeah,
We'll see.
yeah. Okay, I know it's past time. We'll do a quick 3 questions fast fire, and if nothing comes to you, that's okay. But if something comes to you, I'm just gonna ask you 3 things, short reflective prompts. What's a line of poetry that's changed you?
I don't know if it's changed me, but it was a line of Mary Oliver's: "You don't have to be good. You don't have to walk on your knees 100 miles through the desert. You just have to allow the the animal of your body to love what it loves." It's a beautiful line of Mary Oliver from the poem, I think, one of her best poems, called "Wild Geese."
Oh, I love that. I'm writing that down. That is going on a mantra on my wall somewhere. Um,
If you just type in "wild geese," it'll come up in the computer.
all right, second one, a mistake that led you to beauty.
I I can't answer that. I don't know.
Okay, well,
Yeah,
another
yeah.
time, if something
I have a sort of and I don't want to go into detail, but I I don't think in terms of mistakes anymore. I grew up with that, and I left that behind. So everything has its purpose.
well, that's a fine response in itself.
Okay. Okay.
Last one, what does being wise mean to you now?
To realize that, uh, to realize the oneness of everything.
Mm,
Everything is connected very often in a mysterious way.
mm,
That we are all connected, and that we are connected to the world, and we are maybe one complete manifestation. And it would be, to me, we haven't talked about that whole side of me. It would be a complete manifestation of the spirit, that the world is spirit and the universe is spirit. And
mm,
the material is just coagulated spirit. It's just densified spirit. And so we can
mm.
have things, but it is ultimately everything is spirit.
Thank you. I love that. That is a great place to end. Densified spirit. I love that.
Identified is not a word, but it is now.
It is now. We're putting that in the English dictionary. Um, Thank you, Ulrich, so much. Thank you. This has been such a great conversation. And thank you to everyone who's joined us today. If you found something meaningful here, I hope you'll revisit Heartwork or any of other Ulrich's works that will be available through Life Giving Books. And this replay will be available for subscribers likely tomorrow. And yeah, until next time, we'll all keep
Okay.
doing our heart work. And thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Thank you. It was easy to talk with you. I liked it.
Thank you. Oh, and Sarah. Hi, Sarah. She says this was such a lovely chat. It was easy to talk to you too, as
Hi,
well.
Sarah. No, Sarah, I think. Yeah.
Yes, that's
Mhm.
Sarah McEwen. You
Yes.
do. Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you,
Okay.
Zelia. Yeah.
Thanks.
All right. Bye. We'll talk to you soon.
Okay.
Bye. I don't, just learning how to end this. Here we go.